One of the biggest problems people have in CrossFit is deciding where in a workout to push and where to pull back. In this podcast, we're going to talk about the concept of separation value, which gives you a system for determining
when to put the pedal to the metal or when to slam on the brakes.
We just came off of a 3-part series talking about how to strategize workouts, how to actually execute on those workouts, and then video review. And it's just kind of like this cyclical thing that happens, right? Like as you get better with video review, you learn how to strategize better, which then allows you to execute better because you're learning things, basically learning how to better prepare yourself for workouts. And one of the concepts we talked about was separation value. And so the king, Kyle Ruth, is coming on to talk about that concept and kind of like maybe flesh it out a little bit more so everyone can understand what we think about when we're looking at workouts and what are separators in workouts.
Before you dive in, Kyle,
yeah,
how did y'all come up with this whole, why did y'all start looking at it?
That's what I was going to say. It was actually Brandon who kind of brought the concept of separation value to my attention. This was years ago now, but we were doing the open release videos where it was just Brandon and I, the open workout would come out and we would like quickly, jot down the strategies, and then we'd be in front of the camera going through strategy. And that's where I first heard him start talking about separation value. And like at the time, the concept was pretty fuzzy. I would say, I had a general idea that like when Brandon was talking about separation value at the time, what I kind of thought was like, all right, what movement is going to allow me to, create the most distance or gap between the other competitors? That's
why you got the name, because it separates you from.
Right? But he had his concept went deeper, right? It wasn't just like which movements have this intrinsic separation value. His also went down to like personal separation value, right? And that's where it comes in and ties into strategy. So I think what we should talk about when we're trying to do this is we should define, kind of what separation value is, what it is from a global perspective, which movements, tend to have more, I said intrinsic separation value. That's kind of how I think about it. Which ones just allow you to create more separation. But then we should also talk about how to utilize your own personal separation value, the things that you're good at in order to create distance between you and other competitors. Because I think they're not always the same things.
Yeah. So defining this then, it's the separation value in our eyes is the opportunity for you to either gain or lose time or create or lose distance in a race, in a CrossFit setting. So when you look at your separators, it's not just, I'm going to be able to speed these things up and then beat the field. It could also be a huge weakness for you, and it informs you on what to train to get better. So it's not just how do you execute in a, maybe a testing environment. Separation value, that whole concept also will allow you to be a better trainee so that you're training the things to get you better so you don't have these things that are huge weaknesses in your game.
To make this as clear as possible, I think we can use an example. And if you can imagine a workout that has, let's just say it's 5 rounds for time of 75 double unders and 2 legless rope climbs, right? So 2 very, very different movements, 2 movements with very different cadences and tempos. And one of them, the double unders, I would call a very low separation value movement, because everybody who's in, let's just say in the top 3% of the sport is going to be doing those double unders fast and unbroken. Everybody. Yeah, someone might trip,
Sure.
So a small number of the people in that category might trip, but for the vast majority of them, everybody's going to do them basically at the same cadence and unbroken. So there's no way to gain time against the other competitors there. But then we have 2 legless rope climbs. And if you have spent time to develop your grip and upper body pulling strength and legless rope climb, and have like a good kip at the top of the legless rope climb so you can keep the density really short and you can do, 2 on a 10-second rest, that right there allows you to create a lot of separation against the field. And that's what we're talking about when we say certain movements have high intrinsic separation value. A rope climb is one of those, because it does require people to take rest between the reps, unless you're at like the top of the sport.
Right.
But those aren't the people that are going to be worrying about listening to a talk about separation value. They already know this, right? But the double unders, a lot of people spend all this time trying to work on double unders. But once you have your double unders at a point where they're competitive, right? You can do large unbroken sets. You're going to be much better off spending your time focusing on doing higher separation value movements, both in your training and focusing your strategies around setting up, how do I maximize my speed on the legless rope climb?
And correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, didn't this almost come up a little bit for you? Because I remember 7 years ago being here and hearing y'all's talks, behind the scenes. And wasn't it more of like a frustration? You kept seeing people training the wrong things because they thought it was the right place where they get bang for their buck. But after you figure out separation value, you're like, nah, man, you need to be over here.
Well, I think that was kind of the starting point, is that there are all these, over the past 10 years, there have been themes each year in testing. So like one year, maybe it's like more powerlifting stuff. And then the next year it's more Olympic lifting. One year they bring out wall walks. The next year they bring out something new. And then everyone puts all of their focus into a couple of movements, even though that maybe it's
the shiny new object.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
remember the dumbbell year where they brought dumbbells out at regionals, and the next year everybody was training everything dumbbells, and then the entire sport shifted back to barbell.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of it. The regionals that year had all dumbbells, and the next year it was mostly barbells. And so then people only train with dumbbells, and then they miss out this opportunity to get better on the barbell. Or like even the fact that if you do more barbell work and get stronger, the dumbbells become easier. You just need to learn how to layer both of those things in. And so that's kind of where we started to think about, like, how can us looking at workouts help inform how we should train people? And that's an obvious thing. Like, we're always looking at what's tested, and then that helps us kind of figure out how we train. But I wanted to know, like, what could I get the biggest bang for my buck with? Like, what movements, what kind of different styles of workouts, what time domains? And that's where we kind of came up with that separation concept. Before we dive into it, I think we should talk about the different styles. So you talked about kind of that intrinsic or global. So you want to just like define these, the global separator, and then what is a personal separator?
Yeah. So the global separator, and I've kind of touched on this already, but that's the intrinsic separation value of a movement.
Use simple English words.
Yeah, it's
no
intrinsic,
global, no intrinsic. No, I mean, people probably get it, but make it to a 5-year-old.
I'll tell you what they are. They're the most complex movements that you're going to see in whatever stage you're competing at. So, for example, for a quarterfinal stage, this is going to be things like heavy barbell cycling, right? So if we just take last year's quarterfinals, they had the 275-pound
the clean and burpee box jump over.
Right. So a burpee box jump over, there's no separation there at all. So again, using an example, there's because everybody can do them at exactly the same pace. And if you do them too fast,
says who?
Within your peer group.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about the games level athletes, and then maybe bubble level athletes, and then the open level athlete, within the peer group, there's less separation there compared to a 275-pound clean.
Right. So your ability to cycle 275 pounds quickly is the thing that allows you to have separation. So that's why heavy barbell cycling allows you to create a lot of separation, because some people are just going to have to rest a minute between every single 275-pound clean and jerk that they do. The same is true for things like the really dense handstand walking for the first quarterfinals workout. If you remember, it started with, I think, 300 feet of handstand walking. Now, because it was such a dense, high volume set of handstand walking, the people who are really efficient walking on their hands could create a ton of separation, because they were able to kick down and kick right back up and not have any issues, and move through the rest of the workout without having any major issues. Now, I think that's a good example of a really complex, high separation value movement. And taking that even further, at semifinals, when they added the pirouettes, right? You're taking a skill that everybody that was at semifinals already had the skill of handstand walking, because they had to complete that 300 feet and had to be competitive in that workout. Now they're at a competition where all of them can handstand walk, and the separator is the skill component, the ability to turn that. So things like ring muscle ups, legless rope climbs that are high skill, but are also a high cost of failure, right? So if you think about it, if you fail a ring muscle up, it takes a ton of energy. It takes so much out of you to fail that rep, especially if you fail on the dip. You know, you're 3/4 of the way locked out and you fail right then. The amount of time that it's going to take for your body to recharge to do another rep is so much longer than if you go to failure on a toast bar.
Right. How much time do you have to rest before doing the next rep?
Right.
And if you use the example of a toe to bar, you could fail a toe to bar, probably jump back up in 5 to 10 seconds and do another single. If you fail a ring muscle up, you're probably resting 20, 30, 40 seconds before you can do another one.
And doing your first rep, we talked about this a lot, doing your first rep of a ring muscle up also requires you to jump up, initiate the swing, and do the first rep, which takes like 6 or 7 seconds.
The time to turn over is just much longer than most movements.
Versus a toes to bar, you jump up and you can get your toes on the bar within 2 seconds. Right.
So let me pause you real quick.
Yeah.
I think that was all great, but black and white, what is the difference between a global and a personal?
So before we define personal, I think global is those high complex or the most complex movements of the sport or the ones that take the most time in a workout. So it could still be a simple movement that just happens to be most of the workout. We use this example.
You call them global because it's the same for everybody in that peer group?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone is going to have to deal with that movement taking the most time unless it's something that you're really, really good at. So for example, it could be a simple movement like a row. If there's 200 cows of rowing at the front of a workout and then only 40 wall balls after that, right? Like that's an extreme example.
It's a terribly programmed workout.
Well, but we've seen workouts like this, right? Where maybe it's a 2K row and then just 50 feet of handstand walking. Handstand walking is a complex movement, but that 2K is where the separation is going to be in a workout because there's 7 minutes or even 8 minutes spent on the row, and so you can make up time there. So it's also not just the complex movements that come out, but the movement that takes the most time. That's what you have to look at when you're talking about global separators. Individual separators, and Kyle, you can kind of dive into this more because you're going to actually do a talk at the camp on this, but the individual separator are the strengths and weaknesses that the athlete individually has. So Kyle talked about ring muscle-ups being a global separator for everyone because it's a movement that requires more time, there's more complexity in it, but for Kyle in a workout, that could be something that he is using actually to make up more time than most because he's very good at ring muscle-ups. The other side of the coin is something that you're really bad at. So if ring muscle-ups come out,
strict handstand push-ups.
Strict handstand push-ups. If strict handstand push-ups come out and you're only doing singles and there's 50 in the middle of a workout, then you know that that's something that you're going to have to work on. And that, again, informs your training. So then I see it in a workout. I know I'm bad at it. That's an individual separator. I need to go back to the drawing board with my training and make sure I'm working on that.
You also can use those individual separators to inform your strategy. So if using the strict handstand push-up example, if that is your weakness, and say the workout, let's just come up with a simple one, 50 deadlift, 50 strict handstand push-ups, 50 burpee box jump overs. Terrible workout. But that middle chunk, if strict handstand push-ups are your weakness, you're going to have to create a game plan to get yourself through those as fast as possible. And that's the crux of the workout. So you can't go too fast at the beginning on the deadlift, because if you go too fast, you're going to be doing singles the entire time. And you can't do too big of a first set on the strict handstand push-up, because once you fail a strict handstand push-up, that's one of those movements that we talked about that have, it's a high cost of failure. If you fail a strict handstand push-up, the amount of time that you have to rest before your shoulders and triceps are recharged to be able to do another rep is just longer than if you failed a kipping handstand push-up or a burpee. Although I think it would be very challenging to fail a burpee. I know people, I've done it. I've definitely done it in the middle of an open workout where I go down and I don't get back up. But the amount of time it took me to recharge to do my next burpee was like 4 or 5 seconds versus, potentially a minute to be able to do another strict handstand push-up. So knowing that middle chunk is your weakness, you need to spend more time strategizing around your own strengths and weaknesses within the workout. And the other thing that I think it's really important to...
Hold on, let me pause you real quick.
Yeah,
Do you think people are getting that wrong? Or is this such an obvious example that it's...
Yes, I think people are getting that wrong. And the reason that I think most people get that wrong is I think that most CrossFitters, when they look at a workout, they look at the individual components of the workout and they think, what's my strategy for the deadlift? What's my strategy for the handstand push-ups? What's my strategy for the burpee box jump overs? Instead of looking at the workout as a whole, right? It would be like doing a triathlon and saying my strategy is to go as fast as possible on the swim, then as fast as possible on the bike, and then as fast as possible on the run.
That's how the real motherfrickers do it.
That's how the real motherfrickers don't finish the triathlon. So the same thing, it happens in CrossFit. People look at it and they're like, oh, well, I'm really good at deadlift, so my strategy on the deadlift is going to be to go really big. And then they get to the handstand push-ups and they bottleneck themselves by doing a big set, and then they're doing singles for the remaining time. Like, yes, this is one of the biggest strategy problems in the sport, is instead of taking the entire workout and looking at it as a whole, they tend to just look at the individual movements within it, which I think is important to do when you're creating your strategy. You got to analyze the separation value of each of those movements in the workout, but you also have to know your own strengths and weaknesses relative to the workout and how it's going to play out as a whole.
Compounding fatigue, which is, again, the contextual side of this, right? You have to look at the workout as a whole and then look at what compounds into the other movements, and will you have fatigue because of the previous movement that you're doing. Like a deadlift may not seem like there's fatigue going into the handstand push-ups, but just the overall metabolic fatigue that you can get from doing 50 deadlifts fast can play a role. And not to mention that your shoulders actually are working when you're doing deadlifts. Yeah.
That's why, it's a classic combination in CrossFit for you to do deadlift and handstand push-up, and there's a reason. because there's that trap and shoulder fatigue from the deadlift that compounds with the, kipping handstand push-up or strict handstand push-up, whatever comes after. So the other thing I think that's really important to talk about here is the fact that, we've been talking about high separation value movements, but what we haven't addressed the fact that all movements could potentially be separators. Like all movements have some separation value. The question is, what's the cost of using a movement to create separation? Example, we talked about double unders and legless rope climbs. You can use double unders as a separator. You can spin the rope as fast as possible, but the cost of that is an increased risk for a miss and more fatigue going into the legless rope climbs, which are in that workout, the more important one. You could also use burpees. You and I talked about this. What's a competitive, for an elite athlete, what's a competitive reps per second or seconds per rep for burpees?
Yeah. If it's in like a fast-paced workout, 2.1 to 2.5 seconds per rep is around where the elite level athlete is.
Okay. But people can do burpees at 1.2 or 1.3 seconds per burpee.
You'll see those guys on Instagram that are like staying low over the bar and they could just kind of sprint 10 reps. Yeah.
The problem is that there's a really high metabolic cost to doing burpees that fast. And so, yes, you can use the burpees to create separation in a workout. If you're really good at them, maybe that's a decent strategy for you. If that's your strength and your personal separation is the burpees, then maybe you do that. But there is a very high cost at using something like a burpee to create separation versus using something like a ring muscle up, which is going to have forced rest, smaller sets that you can do on a clock, to use shorter rest breaks to create the separation versus using a faster rep speed on something like a double under or a burpee to create your separation.
Yeah. And when you're thinking about the cost, you also have to think about like what's the return on that, because maybe the cost is worth it at an end of a workout. If I'm sprinting 10 burpees, then you're trying to go as fast as you can.
Always worth it at the end.
But the 75 double under example, if you were to speed those up, so like Travis Mayer is one of the best at double unders in the sport. He can do 75 double unders at a max pace, probably like 32 to 33 seconds, which is faster than 2 reps per second. The average pace is exactly 2 reps per second, which would mean it would take someone 37.5 seconds to do the 75 double unders, right? Or somewhere in there, okay? If he speeds it up and does his max effort pace, he's only gaining 5 seconds on the field. Whereas on those 2 legless rope climbs, he could gain 5 to 10 seconds every rope climb that he does, and without the effort. So you also have to think about it that way of like, yes, if you want to sprint something and you're gaining a minute on the field, then you have some time banked, you could do that. But if you're only gaining 5 seconds on a movement, it's not worth it.
I actually thought of this while I was swimming, that one of the things that's a good strategy is to move fast when other people are moving slow. And I know that that's like painfully obvious.
Yeah.
However, the best places to try and create separation are when other people are resting, when they're not making any forward progress in the workout at all. So things like transitions. That's one of the most obvious places that you can create separation in a workout always, right? So if it takes someone 6 seconds to transition and you do it in 5 seconds and there's 20 transitions in the workout, you just gain 20 seconds on them by doing no extra work. You didn't have to work any harder. You just rested for 1 second less each time.
So I'll be demoing apparently this workout at some point, but we talked, Max and I talked about 10 rounds for time of, 15 cow row and 15 burpees. And so there are 19 transitions in that workout. That is a ton of transitions. To your point, if there were 20 or 25 transitions, is even more. But Max said that even though that his capacity is not high enough to where he could hold like 1,400 cows per hour on the row every round, he'd still want his transitions to be fast so he didn't have to go hard on the row. And what he means by that is like, why would I walk slowly over to the row just then because I lost time to pull harder? I might as well get over to the row as fast as I can and then keep a comfortable pace on the row for every single one of those 10 rounds, which makes sense, right? Like there's no point in going slow there and then having to speed up where the effort is much higher on the actual movement as opposed to just getting over there quickly. I think that that's something that people don't really think about.
Well, to that point, I think one of the places, talking about the rower, that you can create separation is your time to first calorie.
Yep.
And, we've talked about this at camps, at some of the open prep camps that we've done in the past, but being able to go from off the rower to on the rower and having 1 calorie on, displayed on the monitor, that is the time that takes the longest in any transition, I think, pretty much in the entire sport. Maybe getting into the GHD could take a little bit longer, but the time to go from off the rower to both feet in and 1 calorie displayed on the rower is what takes the longest. And most people drag that out as long as they possibly can too. They get 1 foot in, they do a half a pull, they get the other foot in, they do 3/4 of a pull, and then they think that this is like helping them move along in the workout, when in reality, they just made it take like 12 or 14 seconds to get to 1 calorie, versus if you sit down, put 1 foot in, full pull, get your other foot in, full pull, 1 more pull, you're at 1 calorie, and you did that in 6 seconds. So you literally cut that transition time in half.
Right.
Do you remember there was an open workout? I want to say it was 2019, but that was the year of the 2 opens. So it might've actually been the 2020 open, where it was like 14 calories row, 12 toes to bar, I don't remember the numbers, but it had
14,
the dumbbell
12, 10.
Yeah.
Or
the
something,
dumbbell
something similar.
hang, clean and jerk. That was what I did in that workout. Is I just was like I just tried to transition as fast as possible onto the rower and get my first cal. And I was not in shape. I wasn't training. I wasn't, I was in my between being a regular competitor and becoming a master's. I was in my hiatus at that time, but I was able to turn in a really competitive score because 1, they were low separation value movements and I could just keep moving through them. And 2, because I transitioned so fast
you were disciplined
onto the
on
rower.
your transitions.
Yes.
And again, so let's go back to that example. Like even if it's that workout, 20-minute AMRAP, let's say you go back to the rower even 8 times, right? Like it doesn't seem like that many, but you cut off 4 seconds to your transition compared to someone that's going slow, and then it takes them 5 or 6 pulls to get up to their working pace as opposed to 3. Over that course of that time, if it's 4-second difference or 5-second difference, you're talking about 40 seconds that you've made up just in transitions in that workout.
That's all of the toes to bar. If you think about that, that's you made up literally the entire toes to bar by just being disciplined, getting yourself into the rower and starting pulling at the pace that you're going to row anyway.
Right.
As fast as you can.
Exactly.
I think people just get lulled into taking it easy on transitions because they think of that as rest. And if you stop thinking about the transitions as your rest time and think about your intra set rest as your rest, then I think people would generally capitalize better on that like free separation value. So, I mean, we were talking about transitions as kind of free separation value. The other place is the dead time in the middle of movements.
So Kyle, you did a great job. I've actually already seen your talk that you're going to do at our season prep camp, which is coming up. But you talked about ring muscle-ups as an example, because that is a high separation value movement in almost every single workout, right? And you used the example of 20 ring muscle-ups at the interval workout, and it was the example of the open workout.
Yeah, 23.1.
23.1. Everyone has done that workout that did the open last year. So 60 row cows, 50 toe to bar, 40 wall balls, 30 power cleans, and then 20 ring muscle-ups at the end. And you look at that workout, and there are a lot of movements in there that maybe take similar amounts of time, but when everyone gets to those 20 ring muscle-ups at the end, even though fresh, maybe someone could go and bust out 10 and 10 or 12 and 8 and crush it in 1 minute and 30 seconds. For most people, they were getting stuck on the ring muscle-ups.
Doing singles.
And part of that was just mispacing. They didn't know how to handle the rest times, or they went out too hot on the ring muscle-up. So give us some examples of ways that maybe people could think about that. Yes, it's a high separation movement. So how would you pace that better?
Yeah, so I just ran some pretty simple numbers, and I think you've actually got them pulled up. But basically, if you have someone doing 5 ring muscle-ups, right? So I think that the example I used was 4 ring muscle-ups every 40 seconds.
Yep.
That comes out. What was the total time for that?
So it would be, if you did 4 every 40, it'd be just under 200 seconds.
Yeah, so that's actually 200 seconds. But if you have someone who does like 8, 3, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and they rest only 15 seconds between them, it's even slower. It's like almost an entire minute slower to do ring muscle ups in singles, doing a big unbroken set to begin, which is where everybody wants to start.
Say it one more time for the people in the back.
So here's this is on the sheet. I'm just going to pull it up so that everyone can kind of understand this. When you look at this, and I'm guilty of this too, because I do it all the time. I feel good. I get to the ring muscle ups, and I'm like, I'm just going to do a bigger set. And again, high level athletes, some of them can get away with this. A Noah or a Travis or an Alexis maybe can do a big set and then just go right into their smaller sets.
Part of that is that their capacity is beyond 20 reps. So if they had to do an unbroken set, it would be bigger than 20 reps. And so yes, when they see 20, they can do a big set and then 2 small sets and move on and be fine.
But when we've tested this, Kyle gave that strategy of 4 every 40 seconds. You do that for 5 total sets. It takes actually 2 minutes and 55 seconds to finish those, which, by the way, is way faster than the average even for high-level athletes in that workout. I don't remember what the number was, but it was like 4 minutes for most people. They've just taken so much time. And we're talking about 4 minutes doing 20 ring muscle-ups for someone that could do 30 in 3 minutes. So they were going slower than their 30 ring muscle-ups for time. But what we saw most people do was, let's say, an 8, and then we actually pulled this from someone that did it, 8, 3, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and it took them 4 minutes and 27 seconds. And people think, again, doing a big set and then going right into small sets makes sense because I'm getting a big chunk of work out of the way. I'm getting almost 50%. But the time in between reps after that first set usually degrades so much that it's going to take too much time in between those movements.
So the way I looked at it and the way I kind of tried to tie this into the concept of separation value is that your high complexity, high separation value movements are probably better off doing smaller sets on a clock, right?
Yes.
This example of 4 every 40 seconds is so much faster than doing a big set and then chipping away. But I don't think that is true for all movements. And if you use a lower separation value movement, I think in my talk I used toes to bar as the example.
I was going to say, perfect.
If you use something like toes to bar, where you can potentially recharge from each rep much faster, that doing a big chunk, and in that workout, there was 50 toes to bar, right? Because it was 60 calories a row, 50 toes to bar, yeah. You know, doing 50 toes to bar and opening up with a set of like 15 is probably okay. And then chipping away, it'd be like 15, 10, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, and just keeping that on very consistent rest clocks. So I'm going to take 10 seconds rest after every set and do the biggest. I'm going to do an AMRAP -1. So leave 1 rep or 2 reps in the tank with 10 seconds rest. That actually is a little bit faster than doing, say, for 50 reps, doing an 8 and then 7s on a 45-second clock or a 40-second clock. So it really depends on the movement. You know, really high complexity things like ring muscle ups or rope climb, legless rope climbs, those are probably going to benefit from you having a small set, or, you know, in the case of rope climbs, 1 rep on a clock every, 20 seconds, every 30 seconds, every 40 seconds. But the less complex movements that you can do bigger unbroken chunks might benefit more from doing a bigger unbroken set and then doing steady, consistent sets with like a very controlled rest. But that's one of the keys, is for that strategy of a big unbroken set of, say, toes to bar or chest to bar, and then chipping away to work, you have to hold to consistent, disciplined rest breaks afterward. You cannot deviate from those rest breaks, because as soon as you do, then the other strategy passes it.
Yeah. And to that point, I think this is where we talk about training. You can't just look at this and say, okay, I'm going to do 4 on the 40 seconds and I'm going to be able to crush the ring muscle ups. If you're not training that every once in a while, or doing 1 big set of toe to bar into small sets, it's going to feel like chaos, like every CrossFit workout, and you won't be able to hold those paces. So the goal, and what I do with individual athletes, we do this with our online program, is we may say with toe to bar in a workout, start with max unbroken set, and then you have to go to on 5s on the 25 seconds or 5s on the 20 seconds. And we try to reduce that time every single set that we do, or every single couple of weeks when we do another set of toe to bar. So maybe the first week I'm doing 50 for time, I do 25 unbroken, and then 5s on the 25 seconds for 5 sets. The next week is 5 on the 22 seconds for 5 sets, 5s on the 20 seconds for 5 sets. That's how you get faster within the actual workout, and you actually can get a feel for what that's like, and is it sustainable in a workout. Now, that's going to be different for every person. Like, some people may have to wait 30 seconds or 40 seconds, but that's a good way to train it.
The reality is you have to train both your capacity, that's what you were just talking about. So using the ring muscle ups, 4 or 5 every 40 seconds, that's capacity training, right? The ability to do that for just repeated sets over and over and over and over for as long as, up to 40 reps for high level athletes.
Right.
That's capacity training, but you also have to improve your big unbroken set, because that's the ceiling. That's what determines how many you can do in each one of those little capacity sets. Yeah. And you had mentioned, like, I'm pretty good at muscle ups. My max rep unbroken muscle up right now probably sits around 24 or 25. And when I did the 23.1 workout, I did 5s. I think every 40 seconds. So I did 4 sets of 5,
right,
even though I could do
24
or 25 at the time unbroken. But it made it so I was off so much faster that I got to review a lot of my athletes' videos, and my athletes, most of the people I coach are better than I am. Right, I'm a master's athlete, and we're talking about people that are, semifinal level athletes. And watching their videos, I was like, man, I did the muscle ups like a minute faster than you, and you have a bigger max unbroken set.
A lot of it was
and
because they mispaced,
just
right?
strategy. They do 10 in their first set, and then they're doing singles at the end. And it's like, look, let's repeat, even though you don't need to repeat this workout, let's repeat the workout after doing a video review just to see what happens when we use the small set, consistent rest, or small sets on a clock strategy for the muscle ups, and all of it 100% improved.
Yeah. And I empathize with those that they get anxious when they do this. When I learned or started to try this in my own training, it's like I'm resting too long, or the set wasn't big enough. I feel fine. But that's the point. You should feel fine while you're going through it into the last couple of sets, so that when you move on to the next movement, you can continue to push yourself.
So that you can go bury yourself on the row.
Exactly. Exactly. In that workout, or any, right, going back and forth between movements.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So if I'm listening to this in the audience, I'm sitting here probably thinking, okay, you maybe sold me on separation value. Do I need to really get into the nitty gritty and figure this out? Like, I kind of understand what you're saying. And do I have the confidence to go then look at all this stuff by myself without y'all's help and like know that I'm correct in how I'm assessing things? Is this for the athlete to do as an undertaking? Who's this for? Should this be for the coaches? What do I do with this information?
Well, it's a challenge, because if you don't have a coach to help you sit down and break down a workout when it comes out, say a quarterfinals workout, if you don't have that input, then you absolutely have to do this. You have to have some system, some lens.
Let's define you, though, because who is that? Is that the person who's really trying to compete at the highest level? Is that anybody? Is that the weekend warrior? Who is it?
That's probably the weekend warrior. If they don't have an individual coach and they're listening to this they're listening to the Training Think Tank podcast.
They're not just doing CrossFit for fun.
Yeah, they're not doing CrossFit for fun, but they're on their own. You absolutely have to have a system for creating strategies for a workout, because if you don't, you're guaranteed to not perform as well. Like, we've seen it over and over and over. Even someone like Travis, who's got basically as much experience in competing in the sport as an individual right now as you can have. Even when he goes out and he's like, I'm just going to feel it out, his performances are not as good as when he has a clear cut. I'm not going to say a clear cut strategy where it's like he's going to do X reps on a Y clock.
Yeah.
But
It's a loose plan, though.
But a plan, like knowing, okay, the most important part of this workout are the legless rope climbs. So I need to make sure I pace myself on the thrusters before I get to the legless rope climbs so that I'm not blown up.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it in a nutshell.
It really is as simple as just identifying the movements that are your own strengths and weaknesses and how to plan for those, and then identifying the movements that are going to either be the most complex, which means most of the time taking the most time in that workout. And so everyone's going to spend a lot of time there. How can I make up time in that 5 minutes of the workout that's all on legless rope climbs? And Kyle, you said it earlier, like when in swimming, you were always thinking, when people are going slow, how can I go a little bit faster? And that's what we're talking about here, is like just picking those movements and then also allowing that then to inform your training. Like, there are some movements in the sport that require a little bit more training, and probably you should be spending more time on, because they almost always are huge separators in workouts, things like ring muscle ups and rope climbs.
You will run into workouts that don't have clear separators.
Sure.
And I used an example in my talk of this terrible age group semifinal workout from last year that was rowing, shuttles, and double unders.
Yeah,
that was
an
it.
awful workout.
It was a terrible
That's actually
workout.
kind of fun, but
for who? It was not fun for me. It was 20 minutes of just, nonstop movement, because there's, first off, in that workout, when you have rowing, double unders, and shuttle runs, there is no stopping, right?
Yeah.
So there's no rest. So there's no place that you can just like sneak a couple seconds over everybody else, because everybody's transitioning into the row fast, and it's rowing for meters, where it's like rowing a little extra hard on the rower for meters doesn't really net you that much more. Like, if I rode 155 and someone next to me rode 153, they're getting off the rower 3 seconds faster than me, I'll catch them on the first shuttle. You know what I mean? Like,
but that also is much harder to row a 152 or 3. Yeah.
Right. Then 155, like 155 is something sustainable.
That's the whole, like, the cost that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So when you're looking at a workout like that, the real question is, well, how do you create separation in a workout that doesn't have any clear separators? I think in a workout like that, it comes down to separation by attrition.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's really the other thing, that when you're developing a strategy, sometimes you're going to look at it and be like, well, there's no place to gain or lose time. So the only way to gain or lose time is to go out too hot. Right? If you go out too hot, you're guaranteed you're going to blow up. And that's like the number one way to lose time. So the best way to beat people like that is to to be very disciplined in your strategy and stick to it from the beginning. And yeah, it might hurt more at the end, or actually it'll probably hurt less at the end than the person who goes out too hot. But I think that's the other thing is like when analyzing a workout, you do have to sometimes just use the war of attrition to win.
Right. And those are the fun ones. I know you don't like that, but like those are the old true CrossFit grinders where there's no bottleneck.
No, I'd prefer to have a heavy barbell and ring muscle ups and legless rope climbs so I could bottleneck everybody and then just take my time.
Yeah.
So what's the order of operations when I get a brand new workout if I want to find the separator?
Oh, the way
helpful tips.
Yeah.
Here we go. New workout.
Okay. Workout comes out. We'll use the 23.1 example because I think it's pretty straightforward. We've got row, toes to bar, wall ball, power clean, ring muscle up. I'm going to look at that workout, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say...
Hold on, say the numbers again.
It's 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, going down that list. I'm going to look at the workout. I'm going to say, all right, where's the most time in this workout going to be spent? It's going to be spent on the ring muscle ups, right? I did a breakdown of it. I think it was like about 200.
Is that true for any workout that you access? Where's the most time going to be? That's your first question?
Where's the most time going to be spent, and what's the most complex movement? Which movements have the most rest built into them so that I can try and game the rest?
Let me pause you real quick. So then that illuminates a problem potentially for people is if your first question is where's the most time, the unsaid thing there is you got to know how much time all this takes, which goes back to our...
Yeah, man, that's the first thing we talked about. Part 1 of our strategy podcast series was learning how long movements take. And not only for you, but just the averages in the field. Go and watch videos of high-level athletes and then also your peers so you can get a feel for how long people are taking. That's an easy way to identify weaknesses too, by the way.
We have a series of blogs that are coming out at some point, whenever that gets launched, that we actually are including some of that information in there. We're including it for what we are considering like a top 5% athlete. We're including a seconds per rep in each one of those movements, and we tried to capture as many of them.
Oh, like a little cheat sheet?
Yeah, like a little cheat sheet for strategy.
Here's how long a burpee should take. Here's how long row cows should take.
There's
those kind of things.
A ton of value in that information. Brandon spent so much time breaking down that information for us, and I've used that extensively for building strategies. And then I think it was 2 years ago, I built that a row calculator that tells you how long it's going to take to row 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 calories at 800 calories per hour, 900 calories per hour, 1,000. We keep that internal because obviously there's some value.
But anybody could do that. You can go and run the calculations yourself.
It's all on the Concept 2 website. You just have to take the time to go do it. But like, you do need to know the sport. You know, if you want to be a high level competitor, and when I say high level, I mean like top 3%, top 4% in quarterfinals, you need to have a pretty good understanding of the sport, or you need to hire a coach or work with an organization that does have an understanding of the sport.
Or said another way, that was for high-level people, or if you're just like weekend warrior and you're just wanting to beat the guys at your gym, guys or girls at your gym, it's like, hey, maybe if you figure that out, you get some easy gains.
Oh, it's huge gains.
It's way easier to create and stick to a good strategy than it is to train harder to build more fitness.
That is so true.
It's way easier.
Yeah. And if you're doing both at the same time, that's just how you make up ground on the field.
That's how you become that right there is how you use talent, hard training, and understanding the sport with good strategy. That's elite athlete.
Exactly.
So you said the first thing you do is you look at a workout and say, what's going to take the longest time?
Yeah. So what's going to take the longest? What's the most complex? Where are people going to...
How are you defining complex?
Exactly as it sounds. So like a squat snatch is more complex than a power snatch. A ring muscle up's more complex than a chest to bar pull up, right? The more complex it is, you know, a handstand walking is more complex.
So in that workout, which one was the muscle ups?
The muscle ups are by far the most complex. They also take up the most time.
And within the complex, you can also think about time between reps, because usually you have to do singles or smaller sets on those, which also plays a role in separation.
Are there ever examples where the most complex isn't the thing that takes the most time?
For sure.
Maybe by reps. So
by reps, that happens all the time. Maybe there's only 5 ring muscle ups at the end of a workout. Then that changes our conversation because you don't have to pace it as aggressively as you otherwise would.
So in this example, it's both. It's the thing that's going to take the most time and it's the most complex.
Right.
Yep. And then the thing that was going to take the least amount of time, I always think about, all right, what's going to take the least? Where can I rest? Like, where can I build in rest that other people won't take it?
Great way to think about it.
They won't take rest there because they're like, and it's the wall ball. Spoiler alert, it's the wall ball.
Why?
Because the wall ball everybody moves at about 2 seconds per rep for wall ball, right? Gravity pulls the ball down at the same speed. So if you're throwing it to a 20-pound ball to 10 feet, there isn't really much of a way to cycle it faster. Like, yes, once you receive the ball, you can drop into your squat a little bit faster, but like, there's just no real way to gain time on a wall ball.
Yeah, this is another great example of you could theoretically gain time. And if you had 150 wall balls, you can gain time on the actual split of each rep. But in 40, if you try to go faster, you're using more effort than you are gaining time because you can only gain maybe 1/10 or 2/10 of a second per rep. And over 40, that's meaningless, right?
Wow, you went 4 seconds faster. So what I look at that as like, okay, it's going to be the least amount of time, and there's no separation available in that workout or in that.
Now, is that workout
movement
specific for that, or is that a good rule of thumb that if there's a movement where you can't go any faster than the other people, then that's a good opportunity to rest?
It's an opportunity.
That's a good hack for any workout.
Yeah, generally defined rest. There are exceptions to that. Like, you can't rest in a burpee. Like, the sport has arrived at a level where if you're laying down on the ground for 10 seconds between, every set of 10 burpees, you're just no longer competitive. Like, you have to have that requisite level of capacity. But in wall ball, in 40 wall ball, I think the way that I strategized this workout, and I think I even laid it out in the talk, was 15, 15, 10. I think it was 15, 15, 10.
And then
was
a couple fives to finish.
Yeah. Just to finish. Well, because it would have been 40 wall ball.
Oh,
right?
yeah. 15, 15, 10.
As to
5
opposed
seconds
to,
rest.
if you didn't know this, if you weren't this educated yet, what would your strategy have been?
When I did this workout in 2014, I did them unbroken.
And so did I. And then I blew up a little bit on the power cleans, which then impacted my ring muscle ups, which were good at the time.
Yeah, I was really good. At that time, I could do 30 ring muscle ups unbroken. And it took me 4.5 minutes to do the ring muscle ups, and I was doing doubles at the end. And I'm like, I was baffled.
So the strategy, what Kyle's saying is the better option would have been 15, 15, 10, even though it feels like you're not going fast.
Is that what you did when you repeated it this next time? And when you got there, was there, even though you had set that strategy, you knew all this crap, was there an element of having to really fight that discipline to stay on those paces? Or you were like, haha, suckers, go ahead?
Not at this point. At 13 years into the sport, I just trusted myself. And I knew that doing my 15th rep, letting the ball drop, hit the ground for 5 seconds, pick up the ball and go. Like, what did I lose? I lost maybe 2 reps to the person next to me, and I'm only doing that 2 times. So I'm going to come off the wall ball 4 reps behind them, but fresh. Versus if I did 40 it's crazy that 5 seconds of not having the tension of the ball and being able to take a couple breaths really does allow you to recharge. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where it's like, what's the cost of creating separation? The fact that high separation movements require a long time to recharge, and low separation movements require very short periods of time to recharge. And so, like a wall ball, you can drop it for 5 seconds, and man, you're pretty recovered.
You recharge quickly.
Now, going back to what I just asked you about staying disciplined in there, because you might give that strategy to a new athlete, and do you think they might struggle with that discipline to stay on it potentially? I would say that your confidence came from knowing that data. So if you don't know that data, that's where you're behind the 8 ball.
It's not even like a belief. I think mine came from experience. Like, I've done this enough to know that taking that 5 second rest is not going to hurt me in the aggregate workout. But I do think that for less experienced athletes, that's scary. Like, sticking to a strategy that does have all this rest, especially for big chipper.
That's what I'm saying. But if they can see it laid out visually with the numbers.
Well, hopefully they've listened to enough of these strategy podcasts now going into this year's Open and quarters that they're like, all right, I actually should try strategy.
Also, try it, right? In their training, you should do 40 unbroken and then do your 30 power cleans into ring muscle ups, see how long it takes you, and then break up your wall balls, do your 30 power cleans, and then do your ring muscle ups on a clock like we talked about, and see how long that takes you. And you'll find almost always it's going to be faster when you pace correctly. I mean, there's no way to hang on with all of those high intensity movements.
To that point, I put up a post on my Instagram, a rare post on my Instagram, about the chipper from the Crash Crucible. It got tagged in a picture or something like that. And I have been doing this for a really long time, and I have never finished a chipper under the time cap at a live event ever. Like, maybe one of them, like MFC 2020 chipper, finished under the time cap. The rest always time cap, 100% of the time. And what's happened is over time, I've done a lot more. In fact, I made it a point to do either hundreds or 50s chippers on Saturdays and just played with strategies. What's a good toes to bar strategy for me? Well, it turns out 8s, then 7s, right? On a consistent clock, 8s and 7s, that gets you an 8 and then 7s, that gets you to 50 reps. So if I'm doing a 50 rep chipper and I have 50 toes to bar, I know 8, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. But I've done enough of them now to know that sticking to these strategies does get me further into the workout. And to this point, the Crash Crucible, I finally finished a 100s chipper, and I finished it way under the cap and ended up second overall in it, just because I did stick to a very solid strategy. I did 8, 8, then 7s all the way across for the 100 floating toes to bar. For the double kettlebell hang power snatch, I did 8, then 8, 8, then 7s the rest of the way, right? I had like very structured sets all the way until I got to the end. And then at the very end, I was in a position where I could race on the last set and push it, and just went for the last 20. There was double kettlebell squats for the last 20 unbroken, and ended up passing 2 of the 4 people that were ahead of me right at the end. So it's like, if you can be disciplined to stick to these strategies, it puts you in a position to actually make moves, either in a live competition where you're like in the race. All of a sudden, at the beginning, I was so far behind. We got to the box jump overs, which was the second to last movement, and I was like starting to break away from the middle pack and catch up to the front pack. And I realized when we got to the squats at the end, it's like I was able to move just a little bit faster than everybody else, and I was starting to close the gap. But I had to trust early on that was going to work, and the only way that you build that trust is through doing it consistently in training and screwing it up a whole bunch of times.
I think that's it. You make mistakes. Try both strategies, or if you have 3 different strategies, try those. And maybe, Chris, we should do this. I know that we're going to film that first workout we talked about, which was the 50 cal row, 50 strict handstand push-ups, 50 cal row. I'll do it a couple different ways if people want to see that. Maybe it's AMRAP unbroken and then go on feel and then 5 sets of 10, or maybe it's a couple sets of 10 and then 5s. People will be able to see the difference. Like even in 50 strict handstand push-ups, one may take me 3 minutes, one may take me 5 minutes because I blow up, but then you can get a feel for that strategy works well for me. I can keep it on this clock, so on and so forth. That's how you inform yourself of what's best for your strategy.
You know, when Brandon and I first moved here, this was like 2015, 2016, I was really, really bad at strict handstand push-ups, and we were doing them all the time. He was really good at it, and his strategy was always big unbroken set, big unbroken set, and then chip away.
Yeah.
Right? And I tried that. I tried it over and over and over, and it was never working for me. And finally I arrived at like, hey, I have to just do 5s on like a 15-second, I don't remember what the clock was. But if I did that, at least I wasn't getting beat by like 30
you started
30
tightening
seconds, right?
the clock.
I was able to bring it down to my score versus Brandon down to like 20 seconds or 30 seconds versus minutes of separation, with Brandon doing 25 unbroken and then whatever his back end chip away strategy would be. So it was trial and error and figuring out what worked for me, and what worked for you did not work for me in that instance.
And again, it's going to take you 10, 20, 30 workouts to do. Here's a fun one that everyone can do at home, because I've been doing this every other day, and well, not this week because I've been like deadly sick, as I'm sure people can hear. I'm like stumbling over my words today, but I've been doing 100 push-ups completely cold. I just drop down the floor, 3, 2, 1, start a timer, because I'm interested to see how fast I can get it. The goal is under 2 minutes, which is I'm nowhere close right now. But I've been doing 100 push-ups. The first couple times I did it, I just did like a max unbroken set and then try to do bigger sets to finish, like sets of 10 to 12, which by the end of 100 just gets really hard. And then last week I was like, you know what? I would never strategize a workout like this. I would come up with a game plan and already have my numbers written out. And so this time I had my numbers written out where I did one bigger set, and then I did a couple of smaller sets that were still like moderate. And then I went to the strategy of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Yes.
When the 5 through the 5 to the 1, I'd have really short breaks. And then after I finished my 1, I'd rest longer. I'd rest 15, 20 seconds. And then I'd start my 5 again, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And there's 15 reps blocks there. And I got my fastest time doing that by like 30 seconds because, again, I just strategized a little bit better.
I was going to, if you hadn't gone there, that's where I was going to say, that's my Murph strategy.
Yes.
That's exactly how I do the push-ups in Murph. From the beginning, I don't even do a big set to start. I just
from rep 1.
From the beginning, I go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I don't take a big rest after the 1 because it's kind of a big rest. I go right back into my 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Remember when Mike and I did some variation of Murph for team training in 2021? I clued him into the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 Murph strategy, and we were like 3/4 of the way through the push-ups. He's like, this is fantastic. Like, why have I never been doing this?
So much faster. But that's a good example of something that you can recharge quickly. And instead of doing a big set where you do end up blowing yourself up, you just stay on that clock. I'm going to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And again, you're getting 15 done pretty fast. And then you know that, okay, I have so many sets of 15.
The worst thing that you can do in the sport inside of a Metcon is go to true failure.
Yeah.
Once you go to true failure, the rest time is going to be so much longer. And the more, we've talked about this already, the heavier or the more complex the movement, the longer the recharge time will be. And if you go to failure in a muscle up, man, the amount of time is going to be super long versus if you go to failure in a push up, the amount of time it's going to take to recharge is going to be shorter, but it's still a lot longer if you stay just under that threshold using like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 type strategy. Now, that's not going to win you the Murph at the CrossFit Games, right? It's just that kind of strategy isn't going to work at that level, but for the level that most of us compete at, it's a really successful strategy.
Totally. Cool. Anything else?
I think that's it.
Yeah. We'll try to tag along on this a little bit. We'll flesh it out a little bit more for everyone and do some more podcasts. But we wanted to kind of introduce that concept and let people start thinking about, when I'm strategizing my workouts, how are you picking your separators, both individual and global, and then making sure you're doing that correctly.
That was awesome. Thanks, Brandon.
Peace.